Coming up on today's episode of the Salesman Podcast.
70% of B2B decision makers say they are open to making new, fully self-serve or remote purchases in excess of $50,000. And 27% would spend more than $500,000.
Hello Sales Nation, my name is Will Barron and I'm the host of the Salesman Podcast, the world's most downloaded B2B sales show. On today's episode, we have Marcus Sheridan. He is the author of The Visual Sale, which you can find on Amazon and we link to in the show notes over at salesman.org as well. And on today's episode, that's exactly what we're diving into. Visual selling, whether that be videos or LinkedIn content, whatever it is. We're diving into that, and essentially we're talking about the future of B2B sales here, why thought leadership is so important, and what you need to do to have success, not just now, but over the next 10, 15, 20 years. Again, everything that we talk about is available in the show notes of this episode over at salesman.org. And so with that said, let's jump right into it. Marcus, welcome to the Salesman Podcast.
Yo, Will. Gonna be a good day, good conversation. I got that feeling, man.
Good. I have that feeling as well. So on today's episode, we're going to touch on the book and then probably spin off into a few other kind of parallel conversations from there as well. And we're going to talk about the visual sale, selling visually, how marketing's getting wrapped up in the sales process and creating now finally useful assets for salespeople. But let me just ask you, yeah, perfect. Let me ask you a question here. And I know we're going to go over it because I think you feel the same way as me, but it'll frame up the rest of the conversation. So, Marcus, in the world where the B2B buyer is spending way more time online during the buying process, there's way more visual content and videos and media that they can consume to help them make a better buying decision. Do we really need a B2B salesperson at this point? Or for most B2B sales, can it be done via a online form and some video content?
This is something that I actually think a lot about, Will. And just to set up my answer, I need to read to you a stat. This is probably not new to some of your, let's say, listeners, but it's still very, very relevant. So McKinsey and Company late last year, they came out with a study that said 70% of B2B decision makers say they are open to making new, fully self-serve or remote purchases in excess of $50,000. And 27% would spend more than $500,000. In other words, on a sale, not actually talking to a salesperson. Now, here's where it gets interesting. I think that, and I'm not just saying this, I think actually there's more need than ever for great sales people, but the way they see their job has to evolve. Otherwise, they risk being left behind. And what do I mean by that, right? Of course. So if we look at what's happening, if we're going to have more what you call self-serve, let's say on the website, this means, and this of course aligns with what we're talking about with the book, The Visual Sale too. This means that we need to be able to say things and show things on the front end of the buying process that we don't normally say and show, specifically when they're vetting us, when they're vetting the product, when they're vetting the service, whatever that thing is online. And whose job is that? I would submit that it shouldn't just be, quote, marketing, that this is where sales and this is where subject matter experts need to get involved. And the really smart salespeople I'm seeing today, especially in the B2B environment, are saying, I'm just as much part of marketing right now as I've ever been. And certainly I'm just as much a marketer as I am a salesperson, because I need to get involved on that front end during that 70, 80% when they're vetting our particular product, our particular service. And then we see how they can finish that deal more easily because they've established that rapport, that expertise, again, on that front end. So do I think there's a need for salespeople? I think there's a need for great educators, and I think there's a need to bring it home. I think that you will, though, see over the course of time less average salespeople. And I certainly think you're going to see less sales travel budgets because COVID has clearly taught a lot of CFOs and a lot of accountants that, you know what, we can still sell without getting in a plane or without getting in a vehicle. And so there's a whole conversation around that to be had as well.
So I know the answer clearly to this question is going to be, let's do both. But if you had to, you run an awesome organization there. If you had to spend your own cold, hard cash, would you spend it on a killer marketing team who can drive so much attention to that 70-80% of the buying cycle that the buyer is spending alone and influence them at scale via content? Or would you rather have a team of killer, let's call them subject matter experts, product specialists, rather than old school salespeople? Would you have a group of those individuals who can go perhaps out into the market and generate more inbound leads? Of course, the answer is both. But if it was your own cold, hard cash you had to spend, which do you think would be the most effective to drive revenue?
I like how you ask questions, Will, right? Because if you force somebody to make a choice, then you get to the truth of the matter, right? And I say this, keeping in mind that I started as a salesperson. I'm obsessed with sales, sales language, sales communication. I would choose the marketing team. Now, that team would consist of people you described in the latter. But I would choose that because I don't think our future in B2B sales is based on in-person boardroom meetings. And if anybody says it's based on that, that's just being naive. That is being, you know what? I'm standing here watching the tide come up on the beach, but I have a feeling it's not going to hit my feet. When it always does, it comes up. It comes up. It's what it does. It's the tide, right? And so it's the same thing in this case. We see a rising tide. It's inevitable. And the thing about it is, too, that's interesting, Will, is the salespeople that are, or in business leaders that are most resistant of this are the very ones that are responsible for the shift because they themselves prefer these same types of buying habits. We're all eating the dog food here. Every one of us, unless you're Amish, at which point maybe you're not.
So I totally agree. Something that we pitch all the time on the show is building, you would call it subject matter expert. Perhaps I'd call it thought leadership. Similar kind of things we're pulling here, right?
I'm agreeable to both of those.
Yeah.
Yes.
So you building that, at which point, if you can do enough of it, if you can build an audience, if you can generate inbound leads, if you can really walk the walk, as opposed to the used car salesperson who's just trying to flog random shit year after year and never generating repeat customers and all that good stuff. Once you can walk the walk, you're almost unsackable. You're almost this is cliche that sales managers use all the time of, your territory, you're an entrepreneur, you should be nurturing that patch. That generally becomes real at that point because people come to you because they want to buy from you specifically, as opposed to they want to buy from the organization or product agnostic. As products become more and more ubiquitous and features, and especially when we talk about software products, perhaps most CRMs will do similar things to other CRMs.
You become doubly indispensable, right? Mm-hmm. So you're indispensable to the customer because you are that thought leader, that subject matter expert who's not afraid to tell them they're off track or not afraid to give them your opinions, that very challenger-like, right? At the same time, you're indispensable to the company that you're representing because your brand is so strong that you're building their brand in the process, and it becomes a 1 + 1 = 3, right? And so if a salesperson today can become doubly indispensable, that is a beautiful place to be. But I would argue you cannot do that unless you really are leaning, to your point, into that thought leadership role. I mean, you've got to be willing to put your stake in the ground, start to be a teacher of the marketplace, leverage some of that virtual that we all are so familiar with at this point.
Cool. So we're going to get into the virtual, we're going to get into the visual, and how perhaps, I guess we'll stick to individual contributors, what they can do with the visual sale, as opposed to what a big budget marketing team can do. And perhaps we can talk about that on another occasion, on another episode. But before that, Where do we go with all of this from the perspective of perhaps a physical product? So as we kind of touched on before we click record, my background is medical device sales. The audience know this. They're probably sick of me kind of saying these exact words over and over. But I was selling endoscopic camera systems and surgical equipment to surgeons. Now, on a screen, they probably look quite similar. In the hand, when the patient is on the table, the surgeon's in there, and the patient's safety is kind of utmost importance, which then kind of leads down to legislation and other things. These buyers become less and less price sensitive, and they're more concerned with the physical product. They want a demo. They perhaps need a demo. How does the visual sale impact a B2B physical purchase like that, as opposed to software or things that can be shown very easily kind of via a video?
So this is where I don't agree with you, Will. In other words, I would say that it's much easier to show a physical product over video than it is to show software per se.
Okay.
So let me give you an example of what I'm talking about here. So let's say that it's a medical device, right? Now, if it's a medical device, one would say, okay, well, what I need to be able to do is see it, feel it, touch it, taste it. And so then I'm able to say, okay, I like this thing. Yes, it's much more effective. Now, in a perfect world, would that be nice? Well, yeah, sure, that would be nice. But let's say we don't have that. How do you sell that, in this case, to, let's say, some type of medical professional, some clinician, whatever the thing is? Well, in that context, you have to have in the video, let's say, you have to have somebody that is the symbol of the subject that you're selling to, right? So, in other words, if you're doing a demo of the thing by yourself, won't hold a lot of weight. If you're doing a demo, let's say with a clinician, and you're talking to the clinician, asking him or her questions, and he or she is having to describe their sensory experience, their user experience. Now, by the way, that's just known as a testimonial, right? That's known as, in the 80s, an infomercial. Now, why did infomercials work? Because the principle of the infomercial was really quite amazing, right? They took customers, real people, and they built entire like 30-minute commercials simply around their journey, their experience. And the journey had 3 parts: the need, the problem, the issue that the person had, the journey they went on to solve it, and where they are today because they solved that problem, right? So if you use that, and that's, Disney calls that the hero's journey, right? And so if we do that, let's say with medical devices, right? It's, what's the problem that most medical professionals have, the issue, the frustration, all right? And we could start with this individual medical professional. What's the journey that he or she went on to solve that problem? And that generally is the journey of learning your new tool, your new product. And where are they today because they have now embraced that tool, that product? That sells stuff. The problem is we don't have many of those. So in other words, if you take most organizations with physical products, and you said to them, and this is one of the types of videos that sells the most stuff that we talk about in the visual sale. We call it the just the customer journey video. It's all it's called. The customer journey video, similar to the hero's journey, customer journey video. You go to most companies, most sales organizations, and you say, okay, what are your major products that you have? And of those, how many do you have a great customer journey video for? Generally, they don't have it. They don't have it.
Yep.
And so what do? We keep going in person to show the thing where we could literally do that, I would argue 90% as effectively if we just created that one time with one of their peers. And as you know, Will, in that industry, they don't respect anything like they respect their peers. It's about their peers, right? And that's what we have to show. You can't show a salesman using a medical device and think you're going to carry the day.
You've you've incepted me here via the book, which I've already read, which I'm trying to play dumb to, right? So I can kind of play it out with you for the audience who are listening. But you might have incepted me here for something. But there's something here that I've not really considered before in such an acute context. So as you're describing this, it seems like a no-brainer. So I live in Leeds. One of our local hospitals is Bradford Hospital. There's some world-renowned and kind of world-leading colorectal surgeons there. And because it's a local hospital to me, every Friday I just go and sit in there and chill out, and they'd spend loads of money just because I'd be camped out there. Really, I was skiving, but inadvertently of driving a load of revenue. Now, the colorectal guys there, they would be, I don't want to put words in their mouth, but they would probably be well up for doing a live webinar with the equipment that I was using with them as a teaching moment for their peers, so they look good because we're putting them on a pedestal. The organization would do all of the logistics, all of the infrastructure, all of the video, all that stuff as well. Clearly, it's not as simple as this with a patient on the table. There's things we've got to consider with them. But they would do all that. The company could do all that. That's the value that they're adding. The surgeons look great because they're in front of their peers. And naturally, organically, they're going to be talking about their products. And they're not thick. They're going to know that to get a bit of rub, if they promote the products in the webinar themselves, there's going to be more webinars and all that good stuff. And that would work seamlessly. Now, with one caveat here, I feel like the gap, that would explain the products. You'd get the benefit of social proof from the surgeons, world-leading surgeons using them. That would get your, I don't want to say average, there's no such thing as an average surgeon, right? But that would get these kind of high-level doctors, surgeons, at least thinking about considering changing and embracing that change because it's come from a peer, as you said, as opposed to a salesperson. There's just one gap here, and that is, I'm going to use the word confidence. So some of the scopes used to sell to urologists, they'd go right up a penis and they'd be using these scopes to shoot lasers inside your body to break up stones, right?
Yep.
There's a still, tell me if I'm wrong here, but I still think there's a slight disconnect between a recommendation from a surgeon of, yes, we love this, it's great, and then physically demoing something like that is so tactile and has to physically go inside someone's willy to shoot lasers like in Star Wars. I feel like there's still, the gap there is perhaps confidence as opposed to kind of being sold on the product. Is that fair to say?
I think it's certainly fair to say it, but it's to the extent of what we can do is we can always get to the point, if we use visual the right way, video, virtual the right way, we should be able to get to the point where literally the surgeon in this context says, assuming it does these things like I have seen, and as I've been told, I'm in. I just need to verify it one time. Right? And so I think if we are at that if-then point of if it does what I have seen, key phrase, what I have seen it do from my peers, then I'm down. Then I'm in. Then I'm going to make a purchase. But I would also venture to say, we can always do this. Has there ever been a surgeon that bought a medical device without having used it first?
Yes, because I'll just for you may know this, but just for the audience, typically one surgeon has a loud mouth and gets to choose everything, and everyone sucks it up and chooses what that individual wants, uses what that individual has chosen.
That's right. They're the linchpin of that particular medical center. We'll call it, right? But the thing about it is, it has happened. Now, if somebody says, do you think more medical professionals today are making purchases without having used the device before than ever in the history of, let's say, health and medicine? The answer is probably yes. Now, is that trend going to slow down? No, it's not going to slow down. So what does that mean? It just lends itself to everything that we're talking about here. We're making more decisions than we ever have based on research. That's it. Seeing it. When we say, I need to see it, well, in the past, that meant I had to hold it and do it myself. But that has changed, right? That really has changed. The way idea of I need to see it first manifest today is different than it necessarily did 20 years ago, right? Because if I see all my peers using it, if I see a testimonial of their journey, how it changed their life as a professional in their patients' lives, now all of a sudden I'm saying, I want that thing. Is it going to happen every time? No. But can it happen much more than it ever has? Yeah, I believe so. I know so.
It makes total sense. I'm on board with everything we said. I'm trying to play devil's advocate slightly here.
Of course. That's your job, Will. You make a good devil's advocate.
It comes natural for some reason. I think I'm just confrontational in a smiley way for some reason. I probably dropped on my head as a child. But as we flesh out this webinar to sell, and then maybe we don't need a demo. Maybe the individual hospital, whatever, buys the product and we send in just a technician to make sure that the first few use cases go well, as opposed to having a salesperson there kind of looking over a shoulder, answering questions, and kind of leading the sale, the demo towards a closing point. Maybe we can appreciate that, as you said, if everything's fine at that point, the sale goes ahead. So with all this said then, because again, we're clearly on the same page with this. And we do this with our training product as well. I don't sell anyone. We have large organizations buy into our training product because they like our training and building up to the purchase itself, and they want to implement that into their own team. So they're we're selling what we do essentially. So I'm on board. I'm on board with everything they're saying. But for Marcus, someone who's an individual contributor, let's paint a scenario where the marketing team are terrible. They're no help. They're no good. Perhaps they've had a fight with someone they had a Christmas brawl. They slept with someone's partner. They're not going to engage with you. So we've got to do some of this ourselves. We've got to become, in your words, subject matter experts. How do we go about doing that? Is there a framework? Do we need a blog, podcast, create content? Can we do this just on LinkedIn? I know I'm throwing a lot of stuff at you here, but I want this to be as open-ended as possible. How does someone who's listening to this now who goes, right, I don't have the support of marketing, but I want to invest in my career for the next 10 years. I'm going to be selling in the same market, if not the same products. What's the starting point for all of this?
The big deal. Love this question. I'm going to answer it in the context of B2B products, if that's okay with you, right? And if you want to break off from there, that's fine. But in that context, right now, and by the way, this can evolve, but I don't think there's any faster way to do it than on LinkedIn. I think if somebody said to me, should I podcast or should I LinkedIn right now? Assuming they were using LinkedIn the right way, right? Mm-hmm. Assuming they were podcasting the right way, I would say, as a salesperson, sales professional, go all in on LinkedIn. I've watched salespeople's careers and therefore wallets, bank accounts explode because of the way they use LinkedIn. LinkedIn, to me today, is almost the best of all of it because that's definitively where your customer base is. It's also, without question, where you can do a little bit of everything. If you want to do and I say this because I am all in on LinkedIn, Will. And if you're listening to this right now, follow me on LinkedIn. You'll see what I mean. I post at least one great piece of content every single day on LinkedIn. Something that really makes you think, right? Challenges assumptions, has good conversation. Sometimes it's a video. Sometimes it's a very, very short thought. Sometimes it's a longer form thought. It reminds me of when I first started really on the web hardcore in 2009, Will. It was my first blog, let's call it. Yes, I had my business, but then I had a personal blog. And I started my business blog. Then I started a personal blog where I was talking about business. In a lot of ways, it reminds me of that time. And LinkedIn is a place where, because you've got your peers, because it's focused on professional, we're not worried about what you had for lunch, right? It filters out a whole bunch of fluffy stuff, right? And it allows you to quickly build a strong audience there. And so if someone's listening to this and you haven't done it before, I'd say you take 3 to 4 thoughts of yours, post 3 to 4 times a week on LinkedIn with essentially what the world has taught you. And don't assume everything you say is understood by the marketplace. This is the thing that a lot of people mistake when they start this journey to thought leadership, is they assume that everybody just knows it, and so therefore they're not going to say it. No, you don't want to do that. Even if you're talking to, let's say in Will's case, medical professionals, You don't want to just assume that everybody understands these things. And so by doing this, you start to really build that momentum. And the thing about it is, you can even create it in such a way that you might say, okay, once a week, I'm going to share a customer story, like a journey they went on about something that went well for them. Once a week, I'm going to talk about a trend in the industry. Once a week, I'm going to share an observation about things that are wrong with the industry that I'm in. All right. All right. Once a week, I'm going to do a product demo of something that interests folks. All right. And then all of a sudden you're like, okay, that's my editorial calendar. I'm going to do that every single week. Now, you're like, every single week? Yeah, here's what's cool about that. It forces you to become a dramatically more effective teacher, communicator, and certainly because of its salesperson, right? That's the beauty of teaching. It forces us to have that cognition all the time. People say, Marcus, how do you come up with something really good every day? Because I forced myself to do it. And because I forced myself to do it, I come up with good stuff. Now, sometimes it'll be a 3-sentence post that took me 20 minutes to figure out because I was struggling maybe for whatever reason that day with what to say. Sometimes it could be, 200, 300 words, and it took me 3 minutes because it just flowed right out. That's how it works, and you get better and better, and you get faster and faster. That's where I would focus if I was in B2B products. That's where I would lean into the most. I would do some video. I would do some text. I would mix it up. LinkedIn, baby. Ride that wave, man. Ride
sure.
that wave.
And clearly right now is the time before they start doing what Facebook did and just bombard everyone with ads and just dramatically cuts the organic reach of things, which is coming, surely.
We should have said, yes, it is. Will, we should have said too, and what should they cut out? Because part of this, being very successful on building your brand and driving thought leadership, is not becoming a jack of all social media trades, but rather becoming a master of one. If you try to be a jack of all trades, you'll be a master of none. Many of us have seen that before, right? And so don't try to be great on Facebook, on Instagram. Besides, if you're in B2B products, man, what the heck is wrong with you if you're spending all day over there? I mean, you're just wasting time talking to your friends. Talk to your stinking customers, right? And that's why we go to LinkedIn. And in the process of creating more and more video on LinkedIn, you can maybe start that YouTube page as well, right? And then because you've built your brand, whether or not you want to stay at your company forever, you're going to have now what is really the best resume in the world, which is thought leadership in 2021. That's your resume, baby. You don't need an actual resume. You need the proof is in the pudding online. Like you could see it. This person really lives and breathes their industry, and they have an audience. I can see their audience because of the amount of people that engage with them online. I can see that they're an influencer. That's powerful. That's going to get you a job quicker than anything else.
How much of all of this comes down to just the simple fact that it's very difficult to bullshit for more than like a few weeks when you are when you're posting 3, 4, 5 times a week, right? How much of this comes down to the fact that you just can't lie, talk bullshit, say praise about your product when you don't really care about it, you don't believe in it? How much of it comes down to the fact that you just can't do that for an extended period of time? And so that organically builds social proof in what you're saying.
There is something that is so important and so true, what you just said, Will. People sometimes say to me, I don't understand, like, how do I get really good on LinkedIn? And what I want to tell them is, think a little bit deeper. Because if you really are obsessing about your industry, your products, and your customers, you look at it from all sides. And let me give you an example. A thought leader doesn't schlep their product all day. A thought leader says, here's what's great. And we talk about this in the visual sale. In the book, we talk about different videos that move the needle most for salespeople. One of the ones we talk about is when you're creating a product video. The big mistake that companies make and individuals make is they only want to say who the product is for. That's the easiest thing in the world to do, Will, and that does not get you a star nor a check mark. What earns the star or the check mark and ultimately helps you to become that voice of trust is when you talk about who that product is not a good fit for this is the key to trust when you're talking about products online, especially in the B2B space. Yet, if you look at the majority of, let's call it review videos or videos describing products, how often do they say, now, if you are looking for this, this, and this, then this is probably not the best fit for you. How often do they say that? Almost freaking never, and that's what kills trust. Now, if you do this, though, people in your space might say, oh, you mentioned that it doesn't do such and such. Yeah, because people aren't dumb. Buyers might start off as uninformed, but newsflash, in 2021, eventually they're going to become informed because they have this thing called the internet. And the truth doesn't hide any longer. It ain't 1995. It is 2021. By the way, 1995, that's when the internet started to take off, right? And so that's where we are today. That's where we are today. This is what we got to accept. Buyers aren't dumb. They might be uninformed, but they're not dumb. And eventually, most of them will become informed.
This might have come to you, I'm not going to say you might have had talent for this, and then you had kind of the survivor bias here of being able to leverage that talent to just blog and create content and do this over and over like decades, right? Have you got any resources, anything you'd recommend for someone who perhaps has lots to say, but isn't trained in teaching? So perhaps they're trained in selling. They're a pretty good communicator. They can, explain as a teaching. But is there anything you'd recommend? Any books, any resources for someone who doesn't just want to just blast out stuff? They want to actually effectively teach and inform. And I wrote down here, change people's assumptions about the product, the industry. Is there anything that you can recommend to help people learn how to do that? Because that is a skill that is learned over time, right?
Whenever you ask a question like this, in my case, the subject matter expert has a choice of answers here. I could say something incredibly witty and sexy, but it's not going to hold any weight. Or I can tell the audience what they need to hear, and it's not very sexy, but it's truth. And here's what it is. If you, as a quote thought leader, salesperson, sales professional, etc. If you become obsessive in the way you ask questions, and I'm not talking about you just ask a question and then you say, okay. Like you really learn how to ask questions. Because the great communicators realize that you never really get the core answer on the first response with anything. You ask somebody, how's your day going? It's going okay. Guess what? You didn't get a response just now. What do you mean by okay? Well, it's just okay because such and such happened. I'm having a struggle at home. Really? What's happening at home? Well, I got a sick kid. Really? Tell me what's going on with your kid. Now all of a sudden we're starting to get serious. Now all of a sudden we're starting to make a connection. Now all of a sudden we're really listening and we don't have a planned outcome. Because we're just trying to understand. We're bloody curious, which is unusual for most people. One of the things I love to do with sales teams when I do trainings is I love to say, how many of you are really good with asking questions? Almost everybody raises their hand, Will. Almost everybody raises their hand. Then I say, okay, great. Now, what is a common question that you get all the time in your industry? That's the next question I'll ask. And somebody will say, a common question we get all the time is such and such. I said, okay. Now, I want you to have someone, your peer next to you, ask you that question, but you can only answer it by asking more questions. You can't give the actual answer. See if you can do it. Almost nobody can do it because very few think in terms of questions. Once you see the world in the form of a question and become really, really, truly curious, not trying to dictate outcomes, truly curious, you will never run out of great content again. And you'll start to learn how people think, what drives them. You'll start to see trends that your friends, that your peers do not see. And you'll say things that makes everybody just tilt their head and say, that's interesting. And you don't have to be a quote teacher. You don't have to have a degree. You don't have to see yourself as a world-class communicator, all you have to do is be an obsessive listener and it'll start to fall into place for you.
Amazing. I was teeing you up then to talk about your first book. Now, because that ties into some of this, right? That is the sign of a thought leader, in that you didn't just plug a book, which I'm doing for you, and it'll be in the show notes of this episode over at salesman.org. But you fleshed out an answer. You gave an anecdote, an example of you doing this in the real world, because there's so many quote unquote thought leaders who have big audiences, fake audiences, useful audiences, audiences that do respond, audiences that don't respond, who are just so full of bullshit that it's valuable to put those training instances, those real life kind of anecdotes in the conversation. You did all that, and you give me the answer to the question with the answer of the question, if that makes sense. That was amazing. I loved it. You demonstrated the answer with the answer, if that makes sense.
But I think that's the goal, right?
Yeah.
That's the goal. And I got to say something to this, though, too, Will. I think one of the mistakes that we make in sales, but also when it comes to this journey to being a thought leader, and many don't realize they're doing it. In fact, most don't realize they're doing it. And that is, we try to sound smart. That is a huge, huge mistake. And it's also a big problem. Every single person that is listening to this right now has watched a YouTube video before. And maybe even before they click play, they just saw the thumbnail image. They said, I don't like that guy. And then they hit play on a video, and within 10 seconds, they're like, this person annoys me. Why do they annoy you? It's always, if you got to the core of this, you'd find it's because you're sensing that they feel like they're smarter than you. And so the moment you release this need to prove that you're smart, as the saying goes, it's dumb not to dumb it down, right? That's communication sales 101. It's dumb not to dumb it down. You want to make sure your audience fully understands. The goal is not that they see you as a genius. The goal is that the light bulb comes on and they say, huh, this is so obvious. This is so simple. So like with my first book, They Ask You Answer. That's the one that put me on the map, right? And the thing that made that book so successful, I mean, still today, it's been out 4-ish years. It's selling more today than it sold 4 years ago. The whole reason is because people almost every single day will email me and say, what you did was so simple. Why are we not? I mean, this is so obvious. That's glorious. Here's what people don't say. You're such a genius, Marcus. I mean, there's just no way we could do that, but man, what you did was amazing. Screw that. If we speak in a way, if we communicate in a way that the person feels like the thing that was done is unattainable, what have we actually done? Sure, you got a little bit of praise maybe, but you haven't affected change. And that's what we're going after. We're trying to affect change.
I love it. We've not discussed this before the show, but I'm 100% on board with this. An example from my perspective is we've started a new show called the Sales Leadership Show. The premise of the show is we're hiring new salespeople over at salesman.org at the moment, and I've no sales leadership experience whatsoever. So I'm flying by the seat of my pants. So I'm started a show to share these experiences with the audience and to suck as much value from the guests as possible by asking them stupid questions that perhaps a sales manager wouldn't ask a CFO, a CRO. I'm asking these questions on their behalf because I don't care about looking stupid. I get paid to look stupid on camera. So I'm doing it on their behalf. And the feedback I get just by the premise of the show, not even the content itself, just the premise of the show being that, hey, I'm willing to ask the questions to these, how to describe them without sounding condescending, but these Sales experts are either good experts or the bad experts. Leadership experts seem to be on this pedestal, and they're used to dealing with the C-suite of massive companies, and they have all these frameworks and thoughts and belief systems, all these kind of things that they teach. And a lot of it is just absolute nonsense, because in my experience so far with the sales team and what we're doing over at salesman.org, a lot of it is what you're describing. It's common sense, it's the basics, it's having a framework to work to so you can get a feedback and you know whether it's working or it's not. There's no lovey-dovey language. There's no need to overcomplicate things, and there's no it's simple and basic, and that seems to be what's working. So as I interview these individuals, I can see them cringing sometimes with the questions that I ask. And that's the best episodes that I get feedback on of, you made him squirm a little bit. And that was exciting for the audience to see us both look him. There's one person in particular that's done really well in one episode. And I looked like an idiot because I was asking basic questions that he's not answered probably in 30 years. And you could see him going, why am I here? Like, obviously he's here because the show's got a big audience. But he's going, why am I speaking to this chump? And as I said, that is the few of those shows that we've done so far. They get the best feedback and the most learning from them than anything else we've pretty much ever done.
That's exactly it, right? So, one of the big, when it goes going back to communication in sales, the phrase that I love is the curse of knowledge, right? The curse of knowledge. And that's when someone speaks and communicates in a way that everybody understands exactly what they're saying, when in reality, because they've been swimming in that industry for so long, that they have lost touch with the majority of their, let's just call, listeners, and they speak above them because of it, right? So this is, as you well know, this is prolific in the medical industry. It's prolific in any industry, military, right? It's just like goes down the list, it's prolific. This is why, like, I was talking to my kids about this the other day, because communication is something that we talk about. So, we just constantly work on, we talk about. And my point to them was, you have to be, when you're communicating with somebody, what's more important is that you're reading the person and you're saying to yourself the whole time, did they just get what I said? Because the second you speak above them, you start to create an unequal relationship. And the flow, the energy just isn't the same, right? And so that's what makes you good, Will, right? It's because you're approaching this in a way. I love what you said about this idea of starting with some of the most basic of questions, right? Establishing that foundational stuff first, which is such a big deal. And man, and I had to say this too. I just had to say it. Some of these leadership folks, I listen to them sometimes, and I'm like, when was the last time they actually managed anybody?
Yep.
Because oh man, oh my goodness. The first time, and by the way, I do really love and appreciate Simon Sinek, but the first time I heard start with why, I'm like, okay, you take start with why, and you go tell that to a sales team with a CRM and see how much of the CRM they actually use if you just give them the great why. They're going to need a lot more than the why to use that freaking CRM. But, I love Sinek, but it's just, one of those things, man. It's one of those things. It changes across the board for sure.
The way I have to think about this, and I have to think about it visually, is, and this was I can't remember the chap's name now, but he was essentially a hacker. He did social engineering to break into places and test systems and all this kind of stuff. So clearly an expert communicator. He explained it to me like this: I have a thought, and then I've got all kinds of biases, cognitive biases, and my upbringing and the language and the location and all these different things that then make that thought a bit of a muddle. Then it comes out my mouth. Now, I speak too fast anyway, and I've got a British accent, and there's all these other things. Now, I'm speaking to you today, Marcus, over Skype. Skype is not perfect, and we're not in the same room. So there's subtle cues that we're both missing out on as we engage with each other. Then you've got to hear this through a headset. So it's, again, garbled slightly, and it's not quite as definitive as you hearing the vocal kind of waves come out my mouth. Then you've got, whether you like it or not, you've got cognitive biases, and no matter how kind of how well trained you are. There's filters in your brain, like emotional filters, no filters, and then it goes into your head, and then you've got to translate it. So every time, so that's complicated enough. Even if we're talking something simple, if we're talking maths, which is kind of logical and can be expressed on paper, we can add other elements to it. It's complicated enough. When we start to add fluffy words, industry terms, we're not sure on the knowledge of the person that we're speaking to, so we speak down at them as opposed to starting at a baseline and building up from it. The communication just goes massively askew. And I think this is becoming more and more important over time, bringing us back to the visual sale here of once we can, because we can test a lot of this with a video. It's very difficult to test this on a conversation because there's so much happening. But once we can get a series of videos that do add value to the buyer, that do, because it's what we're here to do, right? It does persuade them to come to our product over competitors. It does add value to them and it gets them perhaps entertained or engaged. We can test that in a video, we can refine it in a video, and that has a tremendous amount of value because it's just cutting out the bullshit that salespeople and individuals and buyers all want to kind of layer on top of all of this. And I'm asking you here kind of the final question of the show. Is video so effective? Does the visual sale in general so effective? Just because it removes a whole bunch of the human complications that are perhaps added on top of this?
Yeah, I think if you said to me, what is that, going back to Cynic, what is that deep why to video right now? Because nothing is more aligned with what we as buyers want today in terms of the buying process and how we want to learn, how we want to engage than video. Because ultimately, what we have to be asking ourselves as salespeople is, did they see me before I ever saw them? Did they hear me before I ever heard them? Did they feel like they knew me before I ever met them? And that's what you can do with video. And that's what equates to trust. And no matter how much platforms change in the coming years, and no matter what comes and goes, because a whole bunch of junk is going to come and a whole bunch of junk is going to go. What won't change is that trust is going to be the most fundamental component of your success and mine, individually and collectively, 10, 20, 30 years from today. That will not change. And that's why that's the thing that we need to continue to obsess about going forward. And video is the great key to that trust.
Love it. Well, with that, tell us about the visual sale and tell us where we can find it, Marcus.
Well, you can certainly get it on Amazon. You can go to thevisualsale.com to get lots of just free tools too. I mean, I got so much free articles and videos and education, thevisualsale.com. Make sure you get the book on Amazon. You can reach out to me directly too if you got questions. Marcus@marcussheridan.com. Look at that. Just gave you my personal email, folks. Marcus@marcussheridan.com. Follow me on LinkedIn. Will, you are the man, man. This is fun. We got to run it back sometime.
For sure. You know this. You're more than welcome anytime. I really appreciate your insights. And with that, Marcus, I want to thank you again for joining us on the Salesman Podcast.